In this video, you're going to see how to deploy your Webstudio project to Hetzner using Coolify. So we're talking about 3 different services: Webstudio, open source website builder; Hetzner, cost-effective hosting; and Coolify, a way to interact with that server without having to do too much infrastructure work and managing deployments. It makes the self-hosting a lot easier. In order to do this, we are going to run through some steps here. We're going to create a GitHub repository. Then we're going to export our Webstudio project to our local machine and then commit that to our GitHub repository. Then we're going to set up our Hetzner server. Once we have our Hetzner server set up, we're going to connect Coolify to that server so they can talk to each other. And then we're going to continue on some configuration in Coolify to get it listening for changes in our GitHub repository and making deployments whenever there is a change. And lastly, I'll touch on how do you update your website and get those changes deployed to your Hetzner server after we do this initial deployment. We're actually going to skip step 1, create a GitHub repository. Easy enough. Go do that on your own. Number 2, let's export our Webstudio project by going to Webstudio and clicking Share, creating a new share link, and copying it. Then we're going to go to our terminal and run Webstudio. I want to install it in the current folder. Let's paste that link we just copied, and now let's select our Docker template. We do not need to install dependencies. So this is going to generate a project that has a Docker file, and there we have it. Now we are going to commit these changes and push them to our GitHub repository. Okay, that is already done, so I'm going to skip that for this tutorial. Now let's set up our Hetzner server. I'm going to go to the cloud service and I'll create a new project here and I'll call this Webstudio Demo. And now let's head over to servers and add a new server. Select the region that you want it in. We're going to select Ubuntu. I'm good with a shared CPU, and we don't need a lot of resources. I'm going to select the minimum with 4 gigs of RAM. We can get by with even less, 2 gigs, but this is just $4 a month. So that's one of the beautiful parts about Hetzner is it's very cost effective and quality hosting. Make sure that you have a IPv4 selected. That's going to make the networking and the connection between Coolify and Hetzner a lot easier. And we need to add an SSH key. So in Coolify, we haven't gone in there yet, but let's just go over there real quick and go to keys and tokens. Here, I'm going to add a new one and generate it. And I'll call this Hetzner Webstudio Demo. And then continue. And let's copy the public key. And this is what Hetzner is looking for. We'll paste it in there, and I might as well give it the same name. And there we go. Add SSH key. So this is going to be able to give Coolify the permissions to talk to our Hetzner server. I'm good with the default volume that comes with it, and the other default options. Feel free to make changes as needed. And this is all good. I'm going to do create and buy now. Looks like it is less than $5 a month, which is pretty great. It's especially great because the traffic scales very nicely. So, I mean, as you get more and more traffic, that cost doesn't get like exponentially high. It doesn't on the Webstudio cloud either, but just, worth noting if you want to self-host it, that Hetzner is also a great way to stay cost effective. Okay, we have a public IP address here. I'm going to copy that, and let's refer back to our documentation. We clicked create by now. Now we have an IP address. So let's configure Coolify to use this server. Heading over to Coolify, we're going to create a new server and paste in this IP address. I'm good with the other defaults. Feel free to change things as you see fit. And now we're going to click Validate Server and install Docker Engine. So this is going to go to it was using a different SSH key I did for a different demo. I need to make sure it uses this key. You won't have that option if this is your very first project. So now we're going to go back to General and Validate Server and Install Docker option. So if this is green, it is. It means it can connect to the server. That SSH key connection is working. The server's live. And now it's going to install Docker on the server just because we have an Ubuntu install. It doesn't come with Docker. This is going to take a little bit, so we'll check back when it's done. Okay, I got an error. I don't know if that actually mattered. I see proxy running, which is what we want. It looked like everything else went well. So we're going to continue as assuming it worked. And we see the proxy running status. So let's move on to step 6, configuring the project on Coolify. So we're going to set up a new project. You could probably do this first. I don't know if the order really matters, but I know it works this way. We're going to add a project, and I'll call this Webstudio Hetzner demo, and click continue. And let's enter our environment and add a new resource. So the resource is going to be like the source of this code, and that's going to be GitHub as we set up. Mine's going to be a private repository. If yours is public, just make sure obviously you don't have any keys in there. I already configured the GitHub app. It'll just take you through it, and you select the repository you want it to have access to. Let's click load repository. And in here, we need to change one thing, build pack to Docker file. That is what our export uses. Okay, now if we're living right, we're going to click deploy. And this is going to take several minutes as it gets that code, puts it on the server, and then sets up Docker using our Docker file. I'm also getting impatient. I forgot to say show debug log so we can actually just see some progress and what it's doing. Check back in when it's done. Okay, it says success, finished. If we're living right, we're going to scroll back up to the top, go to links, open this link, and we have our site on Hetzner. The very first time it loads, the images are going to take a little bit to load because they go through an image optimization pipeline. They're converted to WebP and served as responsive images, but then they're cached. So now we should be able to browse through our site, and things are going to load pretty instantly after those images first generate. And now we go back and forth, and now we have great performance on a self-hosted server, but we don't have to do too much on that server because we're using Coolify. One more note. What happens when you make changes to your Webstudio project? Well, you're going to do three things. You're going to publish the project, even though you're not going to the cloud, it's necessary to generate the latest build data. Then we're going to run Webstudio sync to get that latest build data down on our local machine. And then we're going to run Webstudio build to generate that app from the build data. And lastly, I think I said lastly last time, but actually lastly, push the changes to GitHub. And then from there, Coolify will automatically detect that and then create a deployment. So your changes will be live in just a few minutes. And that is how you host your Webstudio project on cost-effective servers like Hetzner, but without having to fully deal with Hetzner. Nothing against them. It's just, server maintenance can be a little bit nuanced. And we're able to avoid that because of Coolify. Well, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.